is, a lot of these founders have been asking me, what what is there a formula for success? Now, frankly, there is no formula. A lot of people have asked God, but God has so far refused to give a formula. But there are some guidelines, right? And based on these successes and failures that I've seen, I tried to create some guidelines. And this is one guideline. I call it the persistent framework. All right. And I normally tell founders, look, if you are to create a successful startup, try and follow this framework. And I'll just tell you what this is. P stands for problem. Are you solving a problem for somebody? If not, you don't have a business. E is earnings model. Not only should you be solving a problem, that person should be willing to pay you for solving the problem, right? So that's earnings model. I'll skip R for a moment. S is size of the market, because if your market is small, you'll stagnate, right? Sometimes you may have a very large market, but it's very crowded, which means too much competition, right? So in that case, try and identify within that large market what I call a niche, subset of that market which is not crowded, right? But it has to be large enough. Otherwise, again, you'll stagnate, and that's the N in persistent, correct? Then you have the second S, which is scalability. And I'll come to scalability a little later when I talk about Earnicons. Essentially, the ability to grow big and to grow big fast. So your business model should be such that you should be able to grow fast. That's scalability. R is risks, and obviously every business will have risks. And to take care of risks, and the biggest risk obviously is the risk of competition. To take care of that, you need what many of us call a moat, and what I have called an entry barrier, which is the E, right? So you need an entry barrier, and if you have an innovative solution, which takes time for the other guy to copy, then, for example, if you have a patent or two, then you have a reasonably strong entry barrier, right? And the last two letters in this persistent framework are T and T. The first T is team, which starts with the founders. And the last T is extremely important. It stands for traction, which is, are you getting customers? Are they increasing month on month? Are they increasing quarter on quarter? Is the same customer coming back, assuming it's a repeat kind of product? So the persistent model, my the almost all the focus in the book is how companies have either followed this model or not followed this model, and therefore have either become successful, got money, or not become successful and maybe died, right? And that's what I've introduced in this book. Then I moved into another book, which is this one. It's called The Dream Founder. And by the way, DREAM is also an acronym. So, incidentally, when I talk about persistent, that's a model which investors also use to try and evaluate startups for putting money in. Right. Second book was this Dream Founder, and DREAM is also an acronym. Dream big, get the right team, execution, attitude, and finally make opportunities out of crisis. This book was written during COVID, so which is why everybody was worried about what the hell to do since COVID had hit us. So that was book number two in the startup field. And then these were both these books were basically about early stage startups, small startups, right? Then I said, let's look at the other end of the spectrum, which is, those massive, those giants, the mammoths, right? The Naukris of the world, the Policy Bazaars of the world, the Baijus of the world, the Zerodhas of the world. And which is why I came up with this third book in the series on startups, which is called the Earnicons, right? And I'll give you a little background as to how this term came up. And I think Jayesh summarized it very well. I'll just take you back to the late 90s, right? Which is around the time that the internet had come into India, around the time, approximately, right? About 2, 3 years after it came into the US. Now, when the internet came in, there is a very interesting term that all of us had coined. And I'll share that term with you, that phrase with you. We used to say geography has now become history. And let me explain what that means. It's a very, very powerful statement. If you look at businesses before the internet era, in most cases, your customers were nearby, right? They were localized, maybe in the same colony or maybe in the same city, but definitely not far away. It was very tough to have a customer who was far away, right? But once the internet came in, and you were an internet based business, you could be sitting anywhere in the country. You could be in Delhi or Bombay, and your customer could be in Mizoram or Kanyakumari or wherever, it didn't matter, right? So, geographic, or it could even be abroad. So, geographical constraints suddenly had been removed by the internet, and which is why we say geography had become history. Now, what happened? Because geography became history, the opportunity to grow suddenly came up, right? It was so much easier to grow. You know, if you are, let's say, a manufacturing unit and you want to, increase your manufacturing capacity to the south of India or to the east of India or whatever, you set up a new plant, it will take you 2 years, 3 years, etc., right? But in the internet space, there is no problem. You can do it anywhere, right? So therefore, the opportunity to grow became very, very high. And founder said, okay, wonderful, we will now start growing. What happened was the guys who were growing, and you had the opportunity to grow fast. I talked about scalability. The opportunity was to scale rapidly. Now, those who scaled rapidly, those companies, those internet based companies who scaled rapidly, they survived, they kept growing, and the ones who were slower, they died, they collapsed, right? Or maybe in a few cases, they were bought out, right? So the bigger ones, the ones that were growing rapidly, survived, grew to become market leaders, and the smaller guys just collapsed, right? So the founders said, wonderful, let us just keep growing and we will become market leaders, we'll become unicorns, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, and I think that is the key issue Jayesh raised. Jayesh, you're having coffee or beer? Coffee.
Coffee, coffee.
Oh, okay. Can you send me some? I know you're in Bombay, I'm in Delhi, but Dunzo will work.
That's true. That's
That's
true. That's the technology we are talking about. Customer
yeah,
can be anywhere.
So, founders said, let's grow and let's grow to become big and market leaders and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, that growth became growth at any cost, even at the cost of profits. And that was the fundamental problem. So the problem now was people were growing, but they were losing money, they were burning cash, right? But they said, no problem, we'll keep growing, we'll keep getting funded. And ultimately, when we become unicorns, we become market leaders, then we'll look at profit. Unfortunately, or equally unfortunately, investors were happy to take part in this race. They said, okay, you're growing, your losses are growing 100% year on year, but your revenues are growing 150%. No problem, we'll fund you. Okay, so investors also joined the bandwagon. So there was a crazy race for growth at any cost, even at a loss. Unfortunately, that is why you had such a large number of unicorns, which were they had reached unicorn valuation, which means $1 billion or more, but they were loss making, and they had been loss making for years, right? Now, I think Ramdev ji also mentioned this, and in fact, I will share a statement made by the late um, Jhunjhunwala, Rakesh Jhunjhunwala. He once said, "Look, how can your profit be the next round of funding?" And I still remember that statement. You know, if you look at unicorn, it's a mythical animal. Similarly, a unicorn as a company is a mythical company because the day funding stops, that's the end. They can't grow, they can't survive, they'll collapse, right? So, this was the environment. Fortunately, and I noticed something very interesting, fortunately, there were a few companies who said, Nahi chalega, this will not do. We will run profitable companies, we will run genuine companies, not unicorns which are making a loss. And there were very few of them at that time, although now the number is larger. And I tried to coin a term, which is why I call it Earnicons. So unicorns that earn money, that earn profits, and they're unique. They're fairly unique. In fact, when I started writing this book, I found very few such companies. So I picked up four of them, which I think Jayesh has mentioned. So there's Naukri.com, There is Zerodha, which in some ways is a competitor to Motilal Oswal. There's Dream 11, which is into fantasy sports, and there is Zoho, which is into multiple things, but the biggest thing is SaaS-based software based in Tamil Nadu. So this is what I had done, and it was absolutely fascinating, reading about all these founders and their stories and so on and so forth.